Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about difficulty in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires, and to also talk about Total War Pharaoh's customizable campaign settings that will of course affect difficulty. They did a video on this. I will give a link to the video in the description below. They also made the blog post. I think the video is better than what the information they revealed in the blog post. Now, there's a bunch of things they showed, a bunch of things they kind of just like scrolled over them that will have an impact on campaigns going forward in Total War Pharaoh. And hopefully, and it seems likely, that they will introduce such customizable difficulty in Total War Warhammer 3. Now, there's a bunch of things that I think Warhammer 3 could greatly benefit from when it comes to such a system. When they decide to do it, I mean, they've already kind of taken their first step with allowing us to customize our battle difficulty, or specifically, they've changed the way battle difficulty works. It used to be that setting the battle difficulty to very hard would give the AI a bunch of bonus stats, but now this is its own separate slider in Warhammer 3. So if you don't want to deal with AI having +8 leadership, for instance, so they never break. I mean, the leadership aspect is honestly quite annoying when you're thinking about it, because it means things like Skaven slaves and clan rats will almost never rout. But now you don't have to play on very hard battle difficulty with enormous stats to AI. You can still get the better AI behavior from very hard battle difficulty and other benefits that AI gets from very hard battle difficulty, while still keeping the stats similar. And I think that's a good change. Personally, I do prefer playing the game like this because it's not a question of winning battles. It's just really annoying to have those prolonged battles that you know you're going to win, and it's like Skaven slaves not routing ever in a battle is just, one of those examples. So that's good. But what are some of the things that they're doing? Well, one of the things that is available, and they did talk about this, is Iron Man mode. Iron Man mode is basically what Legendary is at the moment. So if you're playing a campaign on Legendary, this is very hard. What it will do is it will prevent you from manually saving your campaign, and you'll only get one single save in that campaign, an autosave. Now, this, in theory, should create a situation where you as the player have more meaningful battles, and the decisions you're making on the campaign are more meaningful. From a practical standpoint, however, it causes a lot of issues when you are playing a campaign. One of these is that because the game is auto-saving so often, what it means is it will auto-save every time you enter a battle, every time you exit the battle, every time you click the end turn button, before the end turn completes, after the end turn completes. Those are the kind of things that it will use. Now, the problem with that, the real problem with that is, if you've watched any of my Let's Play videos where I play on Legendary, because that's the difficulty I use, is that every time you enter a battle, there is lag. That is not present in the game by default. That is only present because the game is auto-saving. Now, sure, if I quick save, it is causing a bit of stuttering, and that is certainly annoying. Now, to avoid that, you can play it without Legendary, but here's the problem if you're going without Legendary. The reason I play on Legendary is because I want the AI to do as well as it can, and there are certainly some campaign benefits that the AI only gets on Legendary that doesn't have on Very Hard. The differences between Very Hard and Legendary aren't enormous. They're certainly not as big as between Very Hard and Hard, but they do exist. People have been able to data mine the game, or at least they data mined it in Realms of Chaos. Please let me know what are the differences in Immortal Empires, because I'm sure things have changed, but there are differences between Very Hard and Legendary. So I want the AI to pose some kind of challenge to me. That's the reason I play on Legendary. And I've never really cared much for the auto-saving system because of the performance issues it causes, because it is causing performance issues. Because every time the game is saving, like I'm pretty certain that playing long campaigns in particular, with that constant auto-saving is really it's causing certain performance issues in long campaigns, and it's causing issues every time I enter a battle. Yes. That is one perspective. to have on that. So having that as its own separate mode, sure, you can still play with the legendary preset, and I'm assuming that's going to be tied to the achievement, but you can now customize that. So that is a good change. One thing I would, however, like to see, and I'm not sure if it's going to be in there or not, is how battle difficulty affects the game and affects AI. So, battle difficulty obviously affects the way the AI plays in battles. The AI will be smarter, quote unquote, in battles if you set it to very hard. Now, some people will argue that setting it to normal will actually yield better results to the AI, because instead of running around like a hellish chicken trying to dodge your projectile spells and all that, they'll just straight up attack you, and they might have a better chance doing so than if they were trying to use those fancy tactics. But here's an issue. If you change this battle difficulty, what it will affect, let's say, actually, let's use it to very hard right now. And you can see it's a Pyrrhic victory, okay? If I set it to normal, over here, is a close victory. If I set it to easy, it is a decisive victory. So let's just take over the settlement. Here's a problem, though, that gets created with this, and it is a major issue, as far as I see it. The issue is that this battle difficulty doesn't just affect your results. It also affects AI behavior in a very significant way, even between AI factions fighting each other. So if you set the battle difficulty to high, then the AI aggression in terms of being willing to attack fortified settlements like Kunlan, for instance, or the Great Bastion over here, or any kind of provincial capital, will be reduced. Whereas if you play with very hard battle difficulty, then it will be increased. This is one of the reasons I think that people are complaining, especially since the vast majority of people, I imagine, play on something like normal or hard. This is one of the reasons that you end up in situations where the AI just seems like it doesn't want to attack provincial capitals. And that seems to have been improved somewhat with various patches. But as long as this behavior is tied to battle difficulty, and it shouldn't be tied to battle difficulty, it should be tied to, hey, I have a full stack, there's a tier 1, tier 2 garrison in a settlement, let's go win it, because they would. As long as the behavior is tied to that, the AI aggression, its willingness to take over territory, is always going to be affected. Like, there's plenty of campaigns I've tested where, for instance, Snitch would just not take Kunlan, or Village would never take the Great Bastion on lower difficulties, because I've tested all of these difficulties to see how it plays out. So say, for instance, you don't want to fight the battle here over Hanyu Port, because who gives a shit, ultimately? Like, it's a battle you know you win, and you don't want to take significant casualties that you never would. Even on easy difficulty, you actually take more casualties than you do on normal. Like, I would never lose this many peasant long spearmen in an actual battle over here. But if you want to reduce your casualties and not fight these kind of pointless battles, you're actually screwing over your entire campaign experience. Because even if I set back up to very hard, it is going to take some time for the AI behavior to adjust properly. So until that happens, the AI is going to be neutered. It doesn't matter if it's legendary, it doesn't matter if it's very hard campaign difficulty or anything like that. All it matters is you mess with the battle difficulty modifier, and so the AI behavior has been changed. Is quite annoying the way the system works, and I would hope that this is one of the things that I think Creative Assembly should change. Now, what did they show in the video, and how would this affect Warhammer 3 in a fairly substantial way? I would certainly hope that AI aggression could be divorced from the auto-resolve results it gets on higher battle difficulties, and honestly, I think like the auto-resolve should not be tied to the battle difficulty. The battle difficulty should affect battles. The auto-resolve should be determined by the strength of your respective armies. In point of fact, I would dare argue that the auto-resolve result should be more so tied to the AI stats that it has, because it should account for higher AI stats. And also shouldn't affect how AI factions behave towards one another, because both of them should have the same auto-resolve. So why is that difference? That's my perspective. But what are the things that could be affected by the changes Creative Assembly is making in Pharaoh, and hopefully they'll add them in Warhammer 3? Well, one of the things, some of the things that are important. Like, I've spent a lot of time on this channel talking about good races, bad races, and all that. When you're talking about a bad race within the context of Warhammer 3, what are the main issues? The ones that I've talked about again and again and again. Well, generally speaking, it boils down to three things: money, replenishment, and recruitment. There are some other things. Climate is one of those things as well, to be sure. So those are the four things, really. Climate suitability, though that depends on a legendary lord by a legendary lord basis. But like Cathay has, as a race, has limited climate suitability. For instance, the High Elves can have limited climate suitability, and so on and so forth. But typically speaking, when you're talking about like the weaker races, when you're thinking about Kislev, demons, etc., you're thinking about how many units can they recruit per turn. Generally, for a lot of the weaker races, it's 2 units. In some cases, it is higher, but there's other problems. It is 2 units, so that means it's difficult to build an army. Like, look at the dwarves. I think the dwarves are the epitome of this. If you're thinking about the dwarves,
I speak for all Cathay.
if you're thinking about the dwarves in a campaign, the dwarves can only recruit 2 units by default. They can get the commandment for free. Their casualty replenishment is very limited. Their income is okay, but you need to build up a lot of structures and gain a lot of territory for them to maintain even half the armies that a race like the Greenskins or the Skaven can maintain. So all of these add up to being significant issues. Here's what they seem to be doing in Pharaoh. They have, and this is the crucial point, you can increase your upkeep, or reduce your upkeep, increase your income, increase your starting resources, increase the amount of resources that regions have, because obviously Pharaoh is going to use the resource system from Troy, but also you can obviously affect AI. Now, currently in Warhammer 3, it's only the AI that gets affected by that. So it's only the AI that can benefit from higher resources. And it's not really that the AI benefits from higher resources, more that the AI, what it does, what it ends up doing, is that the AI just has much lower upkeep, higher replenishment, growth, lower construction costs, and lower recruitment costs. Those are the principal benefits that AI has. It may also get more background income, not entirely certain about that, but we know the AI has significantly lower costs. This is one of the reasons why Cathay's AI in patch 4.0 is so substantial compared to before, because now they get a bunch of benefits with the new Harmony system that they didn't before, and they stack on top of those. So now you as the player can set up your campaign in a way that mods like Radius, for instance, had already been doing, and other smaller mods had already been doing. Darth mod, for instance, and other mods had already done similar things to this in previous Total War games. So you now have the ability of giving yourself those kind of benefits. Crucially, you can also give yourself the benefit of recruiting, having a vast array of starting resources, for instance, if you want to. You can also make your campaign a lot harder. You can basically make it so you can't auto-resolve any battle, you can't retreat from any battle. So every battle you fight is a battle you have to win, or you lose everything. So there's certainly some significant benefits there for the player as well. And yep, and for instance here I'm just going to lower the battle difficulty. It doesn't show the result, like the result doesn't get updated instantly, so I'm just going to need to difference between that. Now, what does this mean from a practical standpoint for you as the player? What kind of difference will that make, you might ask? Well, it means, if you're thinking about like the weaker races, those are the problems they have, right? The limited recruitment options, the limited casualty replenishment, you can now turn those up. And what that really means is that if Creative Assembly were to add such options in a campaign in Warhammer 3, then suddenly a lot of the weaker races, especially if you could just give yourself as the player those benefits, like let's say you're playing a campaign as Akari and you want to give yourself high casualty replenishment because an Akari's casualty replenishment is almost non-existent. Well, you can do so right now. You could suddenly be able to do so, which would be a pretty substantial benefit and make that campaign a lot more interesting. If you could improve your auto-resolve as well without screwing over the AI and its behavior, that would also be pretty damn good, wouldn't it? Just to cover some of the things that they could do as a company to improve the situation in the Warhammer free campaigns. There are lots of options, but it would be a relatively cheap way of improving the campaign experience for some of the weaker races. Hell, it might make even Daniel playable. Imagine that, playable Daniel. What is this? What freak show is this? But it could be done, because one of the problems Daniel has in his campaign really does boil down to that, like money. Like in his campaign, it's not a question of like casualty replenishment, although that can be a bit of an issue, or recruitment slots could be a bit of an issue. But the main issue that Daniel has in his campaign comes down to just money. He doesn't have a whole lot of it, and he's in such a position where he kind of does need a lot of armies. So not having the money in his campaign does affect him in a fairly severe way, in a way many other campaigns wouldn't necessarily be affected. Now, of course, if you increase the recruitment slots, if you increase replenishment, then the kind of commandments that give you recruitment slots, the research that affects that, would be less meaningful. On the flip side, of course, if you can reduce upkeep, if you can maintain more armies, like, holy shit, you don't, like, Rate of Assembly no longer has to go back and rebalance all of the races, because there's a lot of races that could use that. That would be significantly better if they could maintain armies cheaper, or if we could get, like, option to reduce construction costs for ourselves, or have more starting money. But on top of that, you could also have a situation where campaigns feel more interesting. Like they're also showing in Pharaoh random campaign starts for lords, different behaviors for lords. So want to have a campaign where Grimgor suddenly is a pacifist? I guess that could work. I mean, already something like that is already happening in the game, because the faction potential, which I think does affect the behavior, is randomized right now. Well, not necessarily behavior, but the kind of benefits the AI gets is already affected by that. So you could have a better situation in the game than what we have already. And that would be a very welcome development for Creative Assembly, compared to the system that we currently have in place for difficulty. It would make the experience better, would make a lot more campaigns playable, and if you can have a stronger start to a campaign, if you could start a campaign with a ton of resources, that means a lot more options. And it would potentially also help with one of the bigger issues that the game currently has. One of the biggest issues I would say Warhammer 3 currently has is the fact that the early game is the most important part, and everything else beyond that is a cakewalk. But if you could buff your early game, specifically your early game and not the AIs, or if you could choose how you want that to be, then you could potentially have more interesting campaign situations in terms of the mid to late game, especially if you could buff the end game crisis. Now, for my part, what I would like to see, here's some of the things I would like to see. I would like to see the ability of start everyone, not just you, or you could decide to be yourself, or you could be the AI. But what I would like to see is everyone starting out with high-level settlements. Like what they showed in the video, they showed generals, maxed out generals with items. What I would like to see is potentially maxed out settlements, or let's say tier 3 settlements, tier 4 settlements, depending on the race, would certainly vastly improve the campaign dynamic that we do currently have, where everyone starts with tier 1 settlements, or maybe some option where, or maybe a campaign option where we might start with control of, like, let's say if I'm playing Xiaoming, let's say, you know, I start with, like, maybe we could have campaign starts where, like, we already start with some territory, like in Xiaoming's case, you know, you could start with, like, these 2 provinces, the Warp Throne Desert and Wastelands of Jinshen, and then, you know, Snitch could start with the entirety of the Forest of the Moon. And by the way, you can also see the situation over here, how Snitch is affected, because he has, by what I did earlier in the campaign, by modifying difficulty, the battle difficulty, he still hasn't taken Kunlan. And I might add that Kunlan is certainly very easy to take for Snitch. You can do so. Like, you, if you're playing Snitch in a campaign, you can do so with your starting army. That's not a joke, I might add. So the fact he hasn't taken it just shows you the AI cowardice that's affected by... it's affected by the fact I messed up with the battle difficulty there. Now, granted, this is very hard as opposed to the usual legendary, but it's really the battle difficulty that is affecting Snitch in this particular campaign, this particular situation. So those are the kind of things I would like to see, like faster starts, maybe higher growth, you know, better auto-resolve, casualty replenishment, upkeep, which we see, like some of the things that I've been harping on for over a year on this channel, some of the things that I've talked about, like, have been issues in the game, are exactly those things that Creative Assembly seems to be improving with the DLC, with Total War Pharaoh. Would they add these kind of things in, would they add these kind of changes in Warhammer 3? Well, I see no reason why they wouldn't, to be quite honest with you. I think the only explanation for why they might not be in a rush to add these things to Warhammer 3 would be because they want to build up hype, initial hype for, they want to build up initial hype with Pharaoh now that they have something they can give us with Pharaoh that they don't have in any other game. And after that, like maybe with Thrones of Decay, that could, they might add it. I would hope that they add these kind of things earlier in Warhammer 3, like 4.1. Whenever that's going to come out. If it's out, if it's after, if 4.1 is after Pharaoh has come out, sure. Probably not before. They do want to build up hype, ultimately, for Pharaoh, for obvious reasons. But I do think that when you're looking at the situation, when you're looking at the situation that they have with Pharaoh, this might be the thing that kind of saves its hide. Or it could just be a testing ground for some of the things that they want to do in Warhammer 3, because you may not believe it, but Troy contained a lot of the ideas that ultimately became crucial gameplay elements for Warhammer 3. The Warband upgrade system that the Warriors of Chaos use, that's in Troy. The supporter system, that's in Troy, for good and bad. It is in Troy. Along with other things as well that ended up being used in Warhammer 3. Crucially, the resource system that is the hallmark of Troy is in Warhammer 3 through the Forge of Caste Wars. Some people may not like it, but I think like it's a great system and certainly makes the Caste Wars feel unique. So maybe that's how they're treating Pharaoh, right? The same way they treated Saga, like Thrones of Britannia. Because like Thrones, for good and ill, like the recruitment system that Kugaf uses came from Thrones of Britannia, or however, Britannia. Anyway, so they certainly have used these kind of Saga games, and make no mistake about it, Pharaoh is still a rebranded Saga title. That's not necessarily a bad thing, I want to stress out. It's not necessarily a bad thing, and I'm not saying that because, I'm just a shilling for Creative Assembly. I've been willing to criticize Creative Assembly quite heavily and quite often on this channel whenever they've done stupid things. I don't think Troy, like, the problem with Troy, to be quite honest with you, the issue that Troy had, like just the campaign dynamic with the quests and the sandbox, the ocean aspect, other issues as well. the chariot, the infamous chariots, certainly were significant problems in the campaign. It was too much of a limited campaign as well, especially because a lot of it took place on the ocean. Just didn't work very well when you don't have sea battles to speak of, just pointing that out. But there were a bunch of good ideas in Troy, to be clear. The diplomacy system we currently have in Warhammer 3, like when we want to talk about big things that came from Troy, I mean, okay, the diplomacy system was an update, and Troy was an update on what we had in Free Kingdoms, sure. But it still ended up, being a significant upgrade compared to what we had before. Say what you will about Warhammer 2. Diplomacy in Warhammer 2 just isn't that great. To be very, very blunt on that subject. In fact, it's downright awful to deal with diplomacy in that particular title. Oh, he's finally taken Kunlan. I'm impressed. Okay. So there are a lot of things. So that's how Pharaoh is probably going to be used. I would hope that it does well as a game, believe it or not. I don't think it will, to be honest. Just because, well, like, here's the thing. Creative Assembly is not in the best situation right now. Let's put that as bluntly as possible. They're not in the best situation because of Shadows of Change. And that's of their own making. I hate it when people want to blame the community. It's like the community's fault. Like, you're just a bunch of entitled brats. It's like, no, we pay money for this. We expect quality, and we don't expect to be like, imagine, like, people say, oh, it's the price of a Starbucks. Yeah, but imagine if the person at the Starbucks spat in your face every time you went there, basically, and only acted nicely when you put them on notice. That's kind of how it feels like with game developers and publishers these days. It's like they'll try and spit in your face every opportunity they get, or they'll try and raise the price. It's like, oh, your coffee is this price. Like, okay, we're increasing it by $5 this time around. And if you dare complain about it, ooh, God forbid you dare complain about the precious price increase, then you're an entitled brat. That's the mentality, really. But Creative Assembly does need to address that, and the radio silence they've adopted, like what they're doing right now, is just like, oh, we're just not going to say anything. I think as long as they keep acting like that, it won't change anything. Like, if Creative Assembly doesn't tackle this head on with a proper statement, not the crap we heard, but a proper statement, then it's still going to be an issue. Oh, and look, an actual army. By the way, I would totally win. Like, auto-resolve is weird. I don't know what's causing this. Actually, I do know what's causing this. It's the bloody rodent with the 2 epic items over here. The game does care about that. I would win this battle, hands down. Like, there's no way I lose this battle. Like, look at his army. The only units he has that are worthwhile are the Poison Wind Mortars. Anyway, Kostin here, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.